Okay, so we'll start right away then. It's a pleasure for me to announce the opening of this first international conference on the Inklings, being not only the first international conference on the Inklings here, but probably the first conference on the literature written by these writers ever to be held here at Vitoria, at this university. So it's a great pleasure to be able to announce this, and it's also a pleasure to be able to have such prominent Tolkien scholars come from abroad to attend this conference and to give their views on the particular topic that we have decided to focus on during this conference, which is fantasy and national discourse. Now, when we talk about the Inklings, we usually talk about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. There were, of course, many other members of this group, quite a big group of people actually, usually attending meetings at C.S. Lewis's rooms in Oxford in the 20s and 30s and early 40s. But usually when we organize our own conferences and when we go to conferences on the Inklings, we tend to center on Tolkien's and C.S. Lewis's work. They were by far the most well-known of the writers of this group, and two of the most widely read writers ever. Millions, hundreds and millions of copies have been sold of their works, and still not enough academic attention, I think, has been paid to the literary qualities of their fiction, especially perhaps not in Spain. Spain has been a country which, well, it hasn't really been known for staging many events about the Inklings. There is a small group of people regularly attending events coming here from Spain, especially Eduardo Segura is probably the big name in Spanish Tolkien studies, and he's based in Granada, at the University of Granada. He will be coming here tonight. He will be present at the book presentation, and he will be talking tomorrow morning about certain aspects of Tolkien's work. Now, the origins of this conference, the idea for this conference, actually came to us when we were attending another conference in Porto, in Portugal, last year. Maggi and Raul and Andoni, who's also part of the organization here. And it was during one of the conversations that I had with another of the plenary speakers who will be delivering his plenary speech in just a few minutes, Nick Groom, because he gave a paper, a lecture in Portugal about the idea of community in The Lord of the Rings. And I also knew that Nick had published extensively on the idea of national identity and on Gothic literature. So we came up with the idea to unite these different topics: fantasy literature, national discourse, and, well, the Inklings, if you wish, and especially Tolkien then. So we might ask ourselves, what nation, what is a nation, right? And the idea that I want to stress during this conference, and I'm not sure that the rest will, but my intention is to conceive of the concept of a nation as an imagined community. It's not a politically established entity, but it's an imagined community, spontaneously arisen, as opposed to the idea of a state. A state would be this political entity, and sometimes artificial, right? But the idea of an imagined community is obviously very strong in fantasy literature, where you have to imagine everything you write about to begin with. And it occurred to me that it would be interesting to try and delve into the ideas of how Tolkien and Lewis and the other Inklings recreated ideas about national identities, and especially English national identity then, in their literature. And they were writing their books, their works in the 20th century, in which many of the ideas about what it meant to be an Englishman were being questioned during the two world wars, and national identity was actually quite frail, and I think many writers felt the need to help establishing what it meant to be English during this time, and in many different ways. And what we'll look at during these days is how, especially Tolkien and Lewis then, expressed their ideas about what it meant to be English, but through fantasy literature, which is a rather different vehicle compared to many of the other literary expressions of this time. So we'll look at how the First World War affected the imagination of writers at this time. We look at national discourse, and this is not the same as nationalist discourse. I mean, there's this distinction here, and I think it's important to make this distinction. Whereas national discourse is something related to this imagined community, nationalist discourse would center on the superior qualities of this particular nation, right? And I don't think that will be the focus, and I don't think that was the purpose of either Tolkien or Lewis, to highlight the superior qualities of the English, but just to portray what English was for them and what it could be for others as well. So we'll look at Tolkien's work, Tolkien's Legendarium, and we'll look at Professor Honegger, who has been kind enough to come here all the way from Jena in Germany. He will look at Tolkien's project of establishing a sort of mythology for England. He will be delivering his speech tomorrow morning at 10:30 in the morning. And in a little while, Nick Groom, who's coming from Exeter, University of Exeter in England, he will be discussing the idea of the Gothic literature, the idea of identity, and also related somehow to the Inklings, especially Tolkien. And we'll also be centering on other literatures who have dealt with this same issue. For example, the tradition of compiling folk tales, that was a 19th century thing mainly, but it also kept existing in the 20th century. We'll look at the literature compiled by the Brothers Grimm in Germany, and what that did to the establishment of German identity, national identity too. Miguel Ayerbe will be delivering his speech on that tomorrow afternoon. And as you have seen also, we have a stand with books just outside the doors here, books written by some of the people who are attending this conference, who are giving their speeches here. So make sure that you take a good look at them afterwards in the break or whatever, and to see what they can offer. We will also have a presentation, rather informal presentation, a little bit later on this afternoon at the bookshop, the Elka bookshop. And so I would like to welcome all of you to the conference, and thank you for coming from Germany, from England, and thank also the members of the organization who have been kind enough to help us out here. Andoni and Janina and Maji and Nekaitz, very helpful, and it would be very difficult for us to arrange this without you guys too, right? So I will now pass the word to Raul, who will be talking about some practical aspects also of the conference. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for coming. Now we don't have a kind of big audience, not yet. Hopefully, I know that some of you have to be in class until 5 o'clock. So the ones of you who have done the effort, so thank you for being on time, in a sense. I'm going to read more or less the program, okay? The idea for you to know what are going to be the different things we are going to do. So after this opening ceremony, we are going to have the first plenary speaker, Dr. Nick Groom, and we are going to stay with him for more or less 1 hour, okay? And then after that, we have a break, 30 minutes, and after that, we are going to do something different. We are going to see a short film directed by Paulo Urquijo, with a Gothic topic, something that you will really like. And after that, we are going to have an informal meeting with some of the authors that have the books here in Elkar, and we are going to eat some tortillas, drink wine, and so on for free. So you are also invited. Of course, that's going to be probably the best part. Then tomorrow morning, okay, we will start with the second plenary speaker with Eduardo Segura. After that, Thomas Honegger will be the second one in the morning. Break, and then a round table about the Inklings, where some of the scholars will discuss about specific topics related to Tolkien, to C.S. Lewis, related to the Inklings, in a sense. After that, the lunch break for everyone, and in the afternoon we are going to have a panel, but it's going to be focused on possible future responses, especially for some of the students who want to do something with their lives, for example, being teachers or working in a publishing house, things like that, things that maybe can be a kind of future mirror for some of the students. So we are going to present a brand new publishing house, Portal Editions, with 3 different aspects. One is going to be focused on the publishing house itself, and then about the projects and the things they do. Quite interesting as well. Then coffee break, and finally the last plenary speaker, Miguel Ayerbe, in the afternoon. And to finish, the concluding discussion and closer, and a guided tour to know the Gothic Victoria, which is going to be quite scary. We are going to know something about the most curious gods we can find in this super city, and you will probably love them, and that's going to be everything. So just in less than 10 minutes, Nick will be the first one in starting and opening our first international conference about the Inklings. The first, but not the last, of course. Thanks for coming. So,
short break then.
yeah, 10 minutes.